fools. This is probably the third time I've tried to record this, but the first two times didn't quite work. Anyways, somebody asked, and I thought I would try to make a short or a few tutorials. And I'll start with one that asked how it was I got the world of Madungrid in the first place. And I did that by fiddling with the custom parameters, which you can do here. You can see it says E, enter advanced parameters. What I should do though is duplicate. Can I do that? New param set. I don't know if I want to do it. Copy param set. The thing is, I want a small one. I need a... Well, okay, we'll just fiddle with it from here because I can do this. So let's copy the parameter set. Edit. Where's the name? Nullify value. Yeah, nullify you. Why can't I name you? New, enter title, experiment. Okay, so enter it, E. I usually leave the seeding alone because I like to have, random worlds. Embark points doesn't have anything to do with map generation. It's just, how many points you have when you create, a unit of 7 dwarves to go off and do fun things like dying. You need embark points first. The end year basically is the hard limit where rendering will stop. So for now, just because I want to do this quickly, I want to set it down really low. Pop cap after civilization creation presumably means population cap after civilization creation, I think. So I'll leave that one alone. Site cap, blah, same thing again. Doesn't affect how the map renders, just when it stops trying to render new stuff. Percentage beasts dead for stoppage. Now, I'm not sure what they include in beasts, but I assume it means titans, maybe forgotten beasts, other big things, rocks, dragons, I guess. And if a certain percentage of them has died sometime after this next value, after that year has passed, then the map will stop rendering at that point. So instead of 620, or whatever my original value was, it might be 322, whatever. So that's what that, again, doesn't affect the map, just when it stops rendering. For file size and speed of game and having a little bit less content, I do allow it to cull unimportant figures, and since I do like a certain amount of mystery, I allow it to, or disallow it to reveal all historical characters. Now this here is where you start getting into how the map actually is drawn. And in these, you have elevation, rainfall, temperature, drainage, which is like how quickly or steadily water flows out from a region. And that could be underground or above ground or whatever. And volcanism. And savagery. Those are all important. And then after those, again, we go through the same topics, but we mesh. They have meshes and weights, and I'll get into each of these separately. Now, I'm trying to think how to describe this. The first 2 times I recorded this, I did pretty badly. Actually, the first time I was cooking burgers at the time, and it started sizzling, and I had to leave. And the second time, I just did a bad job. Anyways, elevation should be pretty obvious, and it goes anywhere from 1 to 400. So I'm using the full gamut of values. Variance, it's another word for variability. So the higher the number, the more variable the results will be. So I can turn this way down, I think, to a really low number. Actually, I'll do this. I'll do one really low number and one that's significantly higher. So Y goes across, X goes up and down. Hopefully that will be obvious when I render this map. Rainfall, I don't remember what the default values were. Probably like 0 to 100, but I tapered them off squeaky chair at either end just so that it couldn't really go too far in either direction, but for now I'll just maximize those. And again, variance. So I'll just say a very low... Actually, let me do an opposite here. No, let me just go very low on all the rest except the one, because I want to try to maybe demonstrate these a little bit. I don't know how much time I want to take doing this. Let's see. I'm a little confused about having a maximum temperature or minimum of -1,000. But I can't remember what the defaults were either, because again, this is based on non-default my world. But let me just normalize those a bit, turn that variation down to almost, yeah, not nothing. Oh, bunk. Just make them super regular and very, very unvariable, if you can have such a thing. Maximum drainage, again, drainage is how porous the landscape is, really. So if you have really hard granites like you have in my home state, where water is essentially not permitted to transmit, then it's going to pool on the surface. And so you get lots and lots and lots of ponds and lakes, whereas you go further west and a little bit south into, let's say, upstate New York or Pennsylvania, where there's lots of sedimentary stone and soil that permits water to pass easily, you have far, far fewer lakes and ponds and much sort of like a wetter material underneath. So that's essentially drainage in those cases. One has very low drainage, one has very high drainage. Since I like deserts quite a lot, I tend to have very high drainage in very dry areas. So what water does fall drains away very quickly, and so it doesn't have the time to come around and make silty or soily material. It just goes, and you have sandy deserts. So again, let me turn those way down. Volcanism, very big deal for me. I'll turn that way down too. But that's essentially, I guess you could say, high volcanism is an area where the pockets or seas of magma are closer to the surface, and low volcanism is where it's further away or where there are no pipes. So in low volcanism areas, you might get a lot of sedimentary material, some metamorphic, where the stone has been twisted and compacted and chemicals have changed in it and so all that stuff. Sedimentary, not so much. Whereas areas of high volcanism will still have a lot of igneous material in them. So you're talking places where metals and gemstones are more likely to occur. Savagery has everything to do with how nasty the beasties are, and it's not terribly relevant to whether they're good, evil, or neutral. There are savage versions of all of those and non-savage versions of all of those. Now we've gotten into elevations. So let me start by actually turning all of these off. So ignore. The best way I can think of to describe this is to say that these, if you have any familiarity with something like Photoshop, if you do a Gaussian blur or any kind of blur, oops, I'm going to just set all this to practically nothing so that I have a really, I can go to extremes to really demonstrate something. So one, hey, one. Okay, so presumably then a 2x2 mesh, and it goes up to, 16 by 16. It's sort of taking side by side block or blocks, I guess is the fine word, but regions, side by side squares, and sort of blending them together so that the features of one are not completely, the variability up here, the variance is smoothed over. So if it's ignore, then it's not doing any smoothing whatsoever. And what was the last thing? I did rain first, right? So I'm not sure how that's going to really show on the map. But anyway, let's pull up one of these then. The range goes from low to high, and the best way to look at these numbers is like as lottery tickets or raffle tickets. So, the low range buys 10 tickets, the higher range buys 10 tickets. Everybody else only buys one, so there are a total of 23 tickets. So 10 out of 23, this guy has slightly less than 50% chance of being the picked value range for a particular square, whereas these guys will only have 1 in 23 chance. So they'll only occur rarely, whereas these two extremes will happen a lot. So actually, for that sake, let me set that down to just put this one extreme. So right now it's going to be completely dominated by low drainage, which I suppose means it should technically retain a lot of water wherever that happens to be. Now, and the question that got this started was, how did I get so many volcanoes? Well, this is the area where it happens. So you can say there's a minimum number of things that have to occur for a map not to get rejected during rendering. So you can say, I have to have at least 5 mountain peaks or else I don't want it. Now, I like islands because I said this in my previous recording, and it means a lot to me. Like in games like Oblivion and Skyrim, not quite as much, but Oblivion definitely, the map would keep going visibly beyond, to places that are not in the game. And you could walk up to the edge and it would just tell you can go no further. And I hate that. I hate that so much. It's like, physically speaking, you can walk there. There's nothing that can prevent you from doing so except for the fact that it wasn't programmed in. So to prevent that particular feeling, I always go with islands. Now, the islands usually one, like the top or the bottom at randomly selected, is like covered in ice, so it's kind of like a peninsula anyways, but it doesn't count. Cat, don't play with that right now. So what I do is I turn off all partial edge oceans, which means, like, if I did this right here, 1 and 3, it would be a peninsula coming out of one, north, south, east, west, 1. It will pick at random. But I prefer islands, so here we go. 4 complete edge oceans are required for this to pass. Otherwise, it will reject and move on to the next attempt. Volcano number 40. I put it up really high. You could put it up to 200. Probably never get a volcano if I did that, but because it's going to only be able to spawn, I think, in areas that have high volcanism anyways. And right now, this particular map isn't prioritizing volcanism, so I'll just turn that down to like 5. But I usually do that so that some of them will be accessible to me in a place that I actually like. I mean, I'm always trying to get a volcano paired with a river so I can make like a infinite obsidian engine, making thing. It doesn't work out very often, but most of them will end up out in the ocean where you get no trade with anybody, or in the middle of a mountain range where you can't even settle, despite the fact that you are from a race as dwarves that like mountains. You can't settle there, but sure is, half of them appear in places like that, or just places surrounded by aquifers, which aren't very fun. So I just raise the number really high so that I can find at least one that I like. And sorry, the cat's using his squeak toy. Okay, will the cat leave us alone now? I think he will. Big jerk. So, back onto it. Mineral scarcity. I do not know what the numbers directly translate into, except that the lower the number, the more variety of material there is, the more accessible it is. So if you have a really high number, then it will be quite rare. Now, one thing I have noticed is that this doesn't seem to have a whole lot to do with how... See, I can't say that either. But I recently created meteorite material in raw dwarf meat, which I'm using in another game right now that I'm not recording, but may in the future. And maybe I'll make tutorials about that, assuming that the new version about to come out doesn't completely blow all that out of the water. That said, what I'm noticing is, even though I think I have set that material to be very, very rare, I still find weapons made from this stuff all over the place. And I even came across a castle whose entire outer wall was made of pure meteorite. It's very interesting as far as an idea, but it really kind of corrupts the idea of it being rare and special if it's that ubiquitous. So I'm not... This right here definitely determines how much of this stuff renders into the world. But once it's rendered, it seems like access to it's relatively easy for everybody except you. Anyways, caves are essentially the living places of various beasties. And this just determines how many will be put into the world. It doesn't really change what the map is, though. So if you're concerned about what the map looks like or stuff like that, then these won't have a huge impact on it. Titans, same deal. Titan attack population requirement, I think, generally just refers to how many people you have to have in your fort before it starts attracting the attention of Titans. Not related to any anime series that I have yet to start watching, so no spoilers, please. Let's see. Titan attack export wealth requirement. Exported wealth. I think that's another thing. You have to have so much exported wealth before they start attacking, or created wealth. These numbers, I almost want to say none, or put them super high, because it's actually relatively easy to get both of these quite high quite quickly. So, in a couple of years, Titans will be on your doorstep, though they're still quite rare. Anyways, that doesn't have a huge impact on the overall map rendering. These number of demons, bogeymen, vampire curses, all this stuff, they make the game more interesting, and I do not know anywhere near enough about them. But they don't really change, again, how the map renders. But these things do, again. And this gets important. Regardless of what other characteristics various biomes, for lack of a better word, have, regions, they're going to start out as neutral, but they could be eventually toggled to be either good or evil. And these numbers will help determine how much of that happens. So some of these values, I think by default, are even 0. But anyways, the effective thing that's happening here is, in order for the map to be acceptable, the combined number of small subregions that are good aligned have to total up to at least 200 squares. Same thing with mediums, same thing with large. So by sectioning these off, you can sort of guarantee that there's a lot of small subregions, a fair number of medium ones, and at the very least one big region that at least is in excess of 250 squares. But usually you get several, including, like, it's very common for the surrounding ocean that goes around the entire island to be either good or evil. Usually evil, I've noticed, but I'm not sure why. But I just wanted to make sure there was at least some of this material, so I set all these numbers higher than usual. I don't remember what the default is. Now, these usually have values in them, and I have torn them all out, because what I found was, when trying to get more exotic maps, very rarely did these minimum numbers ever get satisfied. And it would tell me, oh, we can't create enough desert tiles, this map's not going to work. And they say that 5,000 times in a row, and you give up and start over. So what I found was, if you want more exotic maps, you got to turn all these off. Or at the very least, start notching them up or down, little by little. But as long as you set the other values reasonably, you probably really don't need to enforce any of them. I know one thing you need to worry about is elves. If they have no woods, they're not going to spawn. So, or if you have no mountains, I assume dwarves won't spawn, which is kind of bad if you want to play a Dwarf Fortress. So you've got to make sure that there is the opportunity for these things to spawn. And forests are going to spawn where there's plenty of rain, and medium, I think, to low drainage, so the water sticks around long enough for them to drink from, stuff like that, and be of the appropriate temperature ranges and stuff. So you don't want to completely exclude anything from your weights and variabilities that I have shown you earlier. Now, let's see. Having done all that, there is erosion. Basically, it goes through so many cycles of just trying to smooth edges and wear down mountains and create sort of debris fields at the base of mountains. You have, stuff like that. Sorry, I couldn't think of how to describe it. You have a minimum number of start rivers, and then a minimum number of rivers that survive the erosion, because yes, they do sometimes get destroyed by it. Eroding extreme cliffs, generally a good idea. I usually end up with extreme cliffs anyways, and sometimes, if you've been watching Azindatur at all, some of the extreme cliffs are just ridiculous. You end up with square mountain bottoms. The bottom of the mountain is square, and it tapers off to something more natural at the top, but it doesn't blend into the landscape. And I put all my erosions way up, hoping to prevent that, but it still doesn't happen. So that is something I myself have to experiment with. Maximum number of subregions. Just taking it at face value, sounds like you only want the landscape to be so complicated, and that might have a lot to do with building tables for what the locals know about regionality and stuff. The more regions there are, the more they have to know, and the slower the game gets and stuff. So a maximum number, I guess that can make sense. But since I don't have access to the programming language itself inside this game, I can only guess. Caverns deal with the underground caverns. How many there are, you can have anywhere from 0 to 3. I always do 3. I like to make sure that there's a minimum amount of openness, because I like open caverns, and I don't like ones that are, I like really open stuff. I don't like too many hidden nooks and crannies and stuff. So I notch those things up. Passages, I assume, refer to this small, twisty, up and down paths between layers that occur sometimes, though not often. And then, of course, whether or not water can spawn. There have been circumstances where no water spawned and I desperately needed it. So what I did was I notched it up to something higher than 0 so that there was always at least a little water somewhere. And, I think even then sometimes I couldn't find any. But most of the time I do. Magma, you want magma. Don't worry about magma. And then these are basically dealing with levels above ground, below ground, between layers, stuff like that. So it's possible in this case to notch it up and say, well, there has to be at least 5 layers between things. So we'll just not put all those at 5. So there should be big fat spaces of solid rock between every layer right about now. Natural caves, I believe, refer to the sort of eruptions, like rocky mounds that occur sometimes in adventure mode, where there is a path that leads down into the caverns. So natural cave size, I'm not sure. I've never seen the caves look any different. So I'm not sure what exactly that refers to, except maybe the eruption itself out of the ground is bigger or smaller. But that's a guess. I don't know for sure. Mountain caves, non-mountain caves, places where creatures can spawn. Oh, actually, this probably just determines how many of them there are around the world and which areas they can spawn in. Do not want caves visible, me personally. I like to have to find them accidentally or ask around for them. Let's see, number of civilizations, yes, that's pretty straightforward. Playable civilization required, yes. I mean, what else would you do? And then, similar to good and evil and the various drainage and stuff, you want a certain number of squares for each. And again, I turn these all down to 0 or to none because I don't, otherwise most maps would be rejected and it would take half an hour to find just one that worked. So if you want to go through that, then fine, but I generally don't. And I find that as long as I have these guys set reasonably well, then it works out anyways. It's just very occasionally I end up with a map that has no elves, so then I just start over. So anyways, we have decided then that, what was it? Elevation variance is very low going across, but very high going up and down. Actually, let's make it even higher, just so you can see the extremity of it. Minimum temperature, maximum temperature, drainage. And I want elevation. I don't know if I think I do. Let's weight it heavily here and heavily here, and let's have it sort of range up. So let's go 7. So you can see it's sort of a bowl shape in values between these things. And I'm gonna change this down to 1 and ignore everything. So let's do this real briefly. See what happens. Oops, that's not what I want. Oh, frig. Okay, so it's done. It's done. There, experiment. And it will ask you if you want to save. I just do it. And I run it. So you can see here it's being rejected like mad, which is actually surprising. It should tell me in a minute why. It's going to probably tell me that a certain minimum, that it couldn't place peaks. Yes, peaks. Okay. So the world generator is having trouble placing enough mountain peaks, and that's because my elevations are not really sufficient. So let's abort that. Edit again. Now, what was happening was my elevation variation was so low that not enough highlands were available for rivers to spawn in. So what I did was I started fiddling with that, and actually I also notched up all of the other variations to 200, so I doubled it, but it's still very low. But what I can do, though, is do something like 250, 250. Should be still way too low for anything to usually spawn. F6. Watch this. I can do things. Well, actually, yeah, let's run it. Now let's thing out. You can see what it's trying to do. Now, there's very low variation on this map. This is actually a really neat map. Low variation has some rewards in that you get maps that look like maps. But also the opportunity for all the other things that need to be satisfied is low. So you can see it's still rejecting these. But enough of them are occurring that it can actually stop and try to finish rendering the world. But you can see there are several stages at which point a map can be rejected. So a lot of these are actually very interesting. Now, let me show you. Can I abort? Yes. I wish I could just have like 2 settings for zoom and ignore all the ones in between. That would be great. And just in case you're looking for tips, Mr. and Mr. Adams. So, let's see, edit. Go back down. What was I trying to do? God, my brain. It just went away. Oh, I was going to show you really high variance. So let's go with something really high. I'm going to just do geometric variance here, and both being the same. Actually, let's not do that. Let's do 100 and 2000. So we'll just go to extremes and let that happen. And go, and then zoom out. You can see, you know what I don't see is a great difference between left and right and up and down. But you can see because there was so... Ooh, what the hell just happened? Because there's so much variation, there are plenty of places for things to spawn at. So it's already finished rendering. It's done. All the possible things it wanted to satisfy could. So you've got... I'm sure you can't see my cursor, but... You know, this... Where's the little guy? There it is. Little cursor. Can you see it hovering around out over a good aligned lake right now? So there's lots of mountain ranges and stuff. But as you can... Oh, shoot. It's saving the file. I didn't want to do that. Happens when your screen is too small. Dang it. Woo, woo, ah. Okay, so let's edit that again. I'm really confused now. Let's make that variance even higher. Let's go to the maximum variance. But what about Y variance? Shouldn't it be... I would have expected like east-west fjords, and instead it seemed pretty uniform. So maybe is this second value not functioning? But let's go this again. Just go really high. F6. Run it. Zoom out. Now you see how obviously varied that is. And that's what variation really means. So, how do I put this? As you can see, what it has effectively done is given the map the opportunity to fill almost every corner of the map, and that produces very square islands. That what's going on in the middle is very interesting, but what's going on along the edges becomes somewhat unrealistic. It's harder to accept. So I think I really prefer the lower variations now that I look upon it. So let's go 400. I'm still now curious why there's such a difference between these two things. Here's X. We'll reverse the two that we had before. And perhaps for your viewing pleasure, we'll change these down a little bit. Let's notch them down 1 and then maybe 3 and then 2. So let's make a bowl shape out of it after all and see what happens. The elevation is probably the thing that will be most expressive for us. You can see it's having a hard time. The variation is quite low. Yep, it freaked out. Actually, look at that. No landscape. That's great. What does it say? Continue. Let's continue for a while. So now, because it's so much more likely to produce lower regions, closer to water level, it's having a really hard time again finding anywhere to put rivers. So let's abort. Go back. Experiment just a little bit more. So what this tells us, 300. Nope, 300. That really confuses me. What is the difference between X and Y variance? I feel like I should know. I thought it would be obvious. X, Y. You know, coordinate systems are a relatively straightforward thing, and yet it doesn't seem to be ignoring, or it doesn't seem to be utilizing one or the other. Seemingly the second one doesn't seem to be being used. I'm not sure how to put that. That's interesting. I may have to do research. Maybe even have provide a follow-up episode, maybe, if I actually figure anything out. So let's zoom out. So here, this is a believable island. I don't know about that one. That's a believable island. I mean, that's quite neat. Yeah. So you can see there's several stages of rendering going on here. But it's still having to... Ooh, friggin' Australia, practically. Nice. It's a bit lopsided, but that's okay. These are nice. But you can see none of these are quite getting to the point where it then decides to introduce good and evil biomes. That one's neat. So it seems like the first rendering stage, if I'm reading this correctly, is everything to do with elevation, then temperature, then it seems... Ooh, look at this. This one already made it. This one made it. Ooh, crap, it failed anyways. Well, it seems like elevation happens first, then temperature, then maybe drainage or rainfall because... Ooh. What? Lack of mountain caves. Oh, you need mountains to have mountain caves. So that's interesting. So you can see this is... Unless you want to set all your minimums to nothing, there is some... You know... There's some variance to all of this, I guess. Or not variance, what am I saying? You have to fiddle with it a lot to get something you actually like. But as long as you understand, I think what all of these are doing... Let's say we want something that rains very infrequently. So we'll do this to... And then the occasional rainy spot just for the possibility of woods. Drainage, again, I like... Well, low drainage I don't like so much, so let's go high drainage, just so that deserts could possibly occur. Savagery won't make any difference with this. Temperature, let's go a cold landscape predominantly. And of course we love volcanism, so let's give that the best of odds. And let's notch up our things. Let's put even a couple of peaks in there. Let's put 2 scarcity. The rest of this won't matter. So let's play this one and see what happens. Oh, wrong way. So that one didn't have any trouble rendering. I don't like it though. Let's see. No. Do not. Can I like try over without having to do this? In and out, in and out. That one's kind of cool. Can't really see... There aren't many deserts. Have we not gotten that far yet? So we have a good aligned outer ocean, which is pretty neat. No massive deserts. I don't see any. I see a wasteland. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, oh, I am wrong. Oh, crap. It made another map. Edit. Takes a moment. Thank you. Edit. So let's see. Did I say low drainage or high drainage? I did want low. I wanted high drainage so that they... Huh. Let's go really high drainage. Perhaps it's just too rainy. I mean, there was a desert. There's a desert. You can't see my cursor. Screw that. So, there you go. I hope that was in some way useful to you. Not every single value means exactly to me what it probably actually means to the game. Some of these I'm more or less guessing at, but I have gotten enough of a feel for it that I can actually produce landscapes that I like. And as I said earlier, turn off some of those minimums, because otherwise you'll never get a map rendered. Now, yeah, well, that's about it. So that's one tutorial. I hope it wasn't too long or too confusing. So thanks for watching, and if you have more tutorial notions that you'd like to see, certainly ask. Here or during the Azindatur comments. Okay, have a good one. Thanks for watching.